Hello everyone, and welcome to the first video of me going through issues and debates. I am outside. Bella is being annoying, so no doubt you're probably going to get an appearance from her. Bella? No? Okay. Today's video is going to be me going through free will versus determinism, or the free will deterministic debate. It is probably the first debate that you are going to look at, but it's certainly one of two that you will learn before you learn the rest of them. So we teach two debates at the start of the year because they're the ones that are the most used. So the video you're watching now is absolutely going to be needed for your Cap 5 because free will and determinism is probably going to turn up in that cap you have later on in the year. But let's make a start. So what do we mean by issues and debates? You need to be able to identify two sides and evaluate two sides of a debate that happens in psychology. For example, is behavior mainly nature or nurture? Is it mainly free will or deterministic? You need to show an appreciation of both sides of the argument, and you need to evaluate the debate as a whole. There are no right answers with free will determinism. It is a debate. So let's make a start. Let's have a look at what the spec says. We're going to be looking at what free will is, what determinism is, but also what the types of determinism are as well. You need to know 5 types of determinism: hard, soft, biological, environmental. I don't know why I can't lift that finger. Why do you not? There we go. But then if I put my thumb up, that goes down. Why does that even happen? And then psychic determinism as well. The last sentence just down here is probably one of the most difficult parts of the spec for students to get, I think, but actually the concept's relatively easy. We're going to be looking at the scientific emphasis on causal explanations. So basically how science is obsessed with causal explanations. So A affects B, and that's basically what determinism is. We do have a definition here, or a Google definition for determinism, but it's essentially what we mean by determinism. It's the concept that our behavior is actually caused by something outside of our control, i.e., it's the opposite to free will, in which we say that everybody has full control over their behavior and what they do. So let me give you a good example here, and I just want you to think of everything we've looked at so far. Why are the cats so weird? Right, no? Right, okay, go on camera and you pretend you weren't just doing what you were doing. So I want you to think about all the behaviors we've looked at so far. Obedience, for example, or conformity, or, again, a good example, the food you like, the people you're attracted to, for example. In this case, also the clothes you're wearing right now. Did you choose those clothes? Did you actually, free of any manipulation, free of any influence, did you actually choose those clothes, or was your choice determined by factors that were completely beyond your control? So free will is essentially this, right? That we have full choice over our actions. Some of you will believe in free will. Maybe you don't think we've got full choice, and to be honest, I don't really think anybody nowadays believes we have full free will in all behaviors. And the obvious, and again, something to note down, but one of the obvious things here is, do you choose mental illness? Do you choose to have physical illnesses like cancer, for example? No, of course you don't choose this. It is determined beyond your control. So nobody really believes in full free will. What my question to you is, to what extent do you believe in it? Not the full extent, clearly, but, well, maybe you do. Right? Who am I to tell you that your beliefs are wrong, even though your belief would be wrong there? But anyway, so if you have free will, or if you believe in free will, our behavior is a result of what we genuinely want to do, and it's not the cause of some determinant that's either in our internal environment or is in our external environment. Did you choose the clothes that you're wearing? If you have a boyfriend or girlfriend, which apparently hardly any of my students do, you think you chose that person. Do you know what I mean? You think that you thought, I'm going to make a choice here. I'm going to get with that person. Well, was there a chance that person was kind of determined for you beyond your control? Maybe your future wife or husband, or the person that you're going to spend the rest of your life with. Maybe they're not actually your choice. Now, apply free will to humanism if you have to. Humanism is the only branch of psychology that actually does believe in free will. It's the only one that says that your behavior is your choice. All of the other approaches that you look at say that your behavior is determined by something outside of your control. So the biological approach says that your happiness is determined by how much serotonin you have, or genetic variations, for example. The learning approach says that our behavior is determined by all like our environment and what people do around us and how good our role models are and stuff. But humanism is the only approach that actually believes that we have actual free will. And the one thing I would say, actually, by the way, there's two things about free will I would say, before I get into this, right? And this isn't one of them, but if you have to describe free will, most of the time people can only give the definition. Define free will. It's when you do what you want, innit? And they can't go beyond that. So you need a little bit more something else. So this term here, personal agency, if you believe in free will, you believe that we have personal agency to go about and do our things, and to make our choices, for example. So personal agency is a term that I would want in there. The other thing, and this is either an AO1 but it's also an AO3, free will is what we call an abstract concept. It's it's not something that you can physically see. It's not tangible. You can't taste it, you can't touch it, you can't see it. Please note, it's impossible to accurately measure something that you cannot see. You cannot measure what you cannot see. So this is a problem for free will because we can't actually support it scientifically. It's just some hippie concept that you may or may not believe in, but you cannot actually scientifically look at whether we have free will or not. So it's a massive evaluation that you do need to be able to be aware of. The flip side of the argument is determinism. Now, what you're going to see is most of psychology, and actually most psychology students, believe in determinism. They believe that our behavior has an identifiable cause that we can see. It may be biological, it may be learning, it may be psychic, but we can know that this causes this. Okay, so the key thing here is that these variables are called determinants. That's a key word to note down. And I want to see you using this term a little bit more. So the things, or I hate that word, but the variables that actually affect our behavior are called determinants. So let me think of a good example. Let's look at free will versus determinism. And actually, no, I'm not going to use that example. Yeah, because it's quite inappropriate. Anyway, now there's 5 types, right? 3 easily identifiable, and 2 are more just schools of thought. But less on that. The first one is hard determinism. What I would put here is that this is an extremist argument. It's not the middle ground of the argument. It's quite. I think it's quite an extreme side of things. It's basically you saying that there is no such thing as free will in the slightest, not even a little bit. Nobody has any control over their behavior, and you have no illusion of free will. You have no actual free will, and so hard determinism, which some people do believe in, hard determinism is quite an extreme argument. What I would like to say, and what I'd like to get you to think about here, is what are the consequences of hard determinism? If I were to turn around to you and say, well, you were always destined to get schizophrenia in 30 years' time, you know what, and there's nothing you can do about it. What happens if I were to say that you're the partner, maybe the abusive partner that you're with, there's no way you could have avoided them because you were always destined to get with them? People might get quite offended at that concept. So you need to understand that free will isn't empirically observable, fine, but at least it's not offensive. At least it's not socially sensitive, and that's a key word here. The other one is soft determinism, which is what most people believe in. For example, There's the example I use to students. Soft determinism is basically you a lot of your choice is kind of filtered out, and you're left with a small selection of a choice, and that's when you make your choice. For example, I don't have every piece of clothing in the world that I can possibly have. I only have my wardrobe. If I had free will, I could go and pick any piece of any piece of clothing. But the the soft determinism stance is a bit like my fashion sense has been determined for me, what I like and what I don't like, what I want to spend money on, what I don't. And I've basically got a wardrobe, and I can freely choose. I have free will to choose anything in that wardrobe, but I don't have free will in deciding what goes in the wardrobe, if that makes sense. So that's like a soft deterministic stance. We have elements of free will, and sometimes, by the way, it can only be the perception of free will, not actual free will. It can be the illusion of it. Now, those are two types. I'm going to speed up going through the other ones. The first one is biological approach. Now, this is quite easy. Biological determinism is concept that anything within your body can cause your behavior to go in a certain direction, and this can be four ways actually, not three. I don't know why this says three there. It can be genetics. So can cause genes, can cause OCD, can cause alcoholism, can cause cancers, can cause your face to sprout hair round your mouth if you want it to, for example. That's genetic. It can be physiological. So what we mean by here, and I would actually just make a note here when we talk about physiological, but literally the physical structure of the brain. So what happens if you've got a really big amygdala? Now, some of you are quite emotional people. Some of you are quite emotional, let's be honest, and you know who you are, right? You're probably quite upset about it now. Do you think you're full choice? Do you think you've chosen to be an emotional person, or do you think it's the fact that you've been born and you've got quite a big quite an active amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain? So that is another example about how your biology can determine your behavior. If anything, I would choose to be more emotional. Personally, I would choose to be more emotional, but I think my amygdala is actually broken or missing or has got some sort of lesion going through it or something, because I'm not the most emotional person. You've got biochemical, so serotonin causing happiness. But what you've also got is evolutionary, and your behavior is determined by evolution, right? This is why you want to reproduce. This is why you want to survive. If you do want to survive and if you do want to reproduce. But basically, genes are quite difficult to ignore. Now, one thing I would say here, this is really important, it's difficult to say that genes cause behavior. It's difficult to actually conclusively say that. What they do give you is a predisposition that may get so they give you a vulnerability to so for example, some of you will have the genes needed for alcoholism, but if you don't have this external stress that triggers off those genes, you will never actually develop alcoholism. So we'll look at this a bit more later on. And did you choose the height you were? Your height is actually decided by, I need to actually search this up for 2 seconds. So I think it's 54 genes. How many genes determine height? There it is. Is it 54? No, it's 10,000. So I was quite close. I was okay. Cool. Cool. 10,000 genes. Jesus. Nearly 10,000 common gene variants influence how tall a person is. That's not free will, then, is it? That's not free will. Let's face it. If you have free will over how tall you were, most of you would choose to be taller. Yet I don't see you growing. God, that was a bit aggressive, Kieran. Calm down, mate. So basically, biological determinism, offensive but easy to identify. The fourth one is environmental, and this is, to be honest, this is pretty much parenting, peers, upbringing, pretty much the whole thing. This is anything in your environment can affect your behavior. So anything can, right? So how jealous your partner is going to determine your behavior. How attentive your parents were, how sensitive they were to your needs, that's going to determine your behavior. Whether your mum or dad smoke, that's going to determine your behavior. So Ash, Milgram, Zimbardo, there's a lot of social influence studies that we looked at last year that you do need to know, basically. And the last one, and probably the hardest one, is psychic determinism. So if you're watching this in the first year and you haven't done psychodynamic approach, you're probably going to struggle here. But this is the concept. This is the concept that basically your behavior is determined by what goes on in your unconscious mind. You don't have control over that. So if there's a big conflict going on in your unconscious, or maybe for example, let's say that you've got a dominant id. You may need to recap psychosexual stages and psychodynamic approach. But let's say you've got a dominant id, and you love sex, you love violence, you love aggression, for example, and you don't want to wait for it. You're very impatient, for example. Well, that's going to determine that you are probably an impulsive person. You are probably a criminal. You're probably a criminal because you like all this violence, etc., etc. You don't want to wait for it. You're impatient, so on and so forth, and you haven't chosen to be it. So basically, is there a concept here that criminals don't choose to be criminals? They are determined by factors outside of their control. Thus, should they go to prison? Surely you should only go to prison if you've chosen to commit the crime. So, as it says down the bottom, this type of determinism also has its roots in explaining criminality. So, for example, what some people do is they suppress guilt. So, a criminal will suppress guilt by saying, well, it's their fault. They were walking around with their handbag through this part of town. It's their fault, it's their fault, it's their fault. So, it does actually explain criminality. Okay, so those are the 5 types. This is where it does get slightly harder. What I need you to understand is that free will is not scientific. And what I mean by that is that it's not an observable phenomena. You can't see it, you can't test it, you can't falsify it, right? And you can't do all of these things. Determinism, you can though. So before I go into the really tough part of this, you do need to get why determinism is scientific. So determinism is scientific as it states that one variable is affecting another variable, and we can generally see that. It has an identifiable cause. One variable affects the other variable. Now, the reason why this is scientific is because we can usually observe this, i.e., it is empirical. That's what empirical means. Basically, it's an observable phenomenon. So, for example, if you have schizophrenia, one of the causes of schizophrenia is that you have too many D2 receptors, too many dopamine receptors in your brain. That's biologically determined, right? Because it's in your brain. Now, that's observable. Now, what I can do, how is it observable, Kieran? That's a fantastic question, random student. It's observable because I can get loads of people with schizophrenia, and I can basically maybe do a test of some kind, maybe a scan, and to determine their levels of dopamine or their levels of dopamine receptors. And if I can see, hold on a second, you've got a shed load of dopamine receptors and you've got schizophrenia, but you don't have a shed load of receptors and you don't have schizophrenia, I can see there's a link there. I can see one thing is clearly causing another. So if we, and this is important for psychology, if we can confirm that this variable affects that variable, in people where they show this variable, we can predict they are going to get this behavior. And thus, we can maybe protect them before they develop the behavior. So it's a primary goal. It is a primary goal of psychology to be able to try predict behavior. If we know that this causes this, we can then predict behavior. And maybe in bad behaviors, we can protect it. We can treat it a lot easier. And the reason why you need to get this. It may take you 1 or 2 times to read to understand, but you do need to understand this for the next bit. Because what you need to understand about determinism is that it does lean into this thing that science has an emphasis, an obsession with causal explanations. A affects B, A affects B, A affects B. That's what we mean by causal explanations. They're not just linked. A affects, has an impact on, manipulates, changes, has a difference on B. So, Psychology wants to be a science. Okay? And the reason why I'm going to slow down slightly is because this bit is probably one of the hardest parts of the spec, in my opinion. Well, according to students' opinions, actually. Psychology wants to be a science. And this involves creating theories and then testing those theories in a way that you can try to falsify things. So as it says, if behavior is caused by something, we should be able to accurately predict how something will react to that determinant. So if results are significant, so basically this IV and this IV affect this DV and this DV. If there's a difference between these two DVs and we've controlled for everything else, then we can probably be sure that it is the IV. I'm going to go through this in a bit more. I'm going to try and go through this in a bit more detail because I think, yeah, I've got it there. So the vast majority of psychology argues for a cause and behavior, whether it's cognitive, psychodynamic, learning approaches. Basically, to be honest with you, every single behavior we looked at last year, apart from humanism, is deterministic. So you can come at that from an offensive point of view. Now, this is one of the only questions that has ever come up. I'm going to get you to maybe pause the video and read this question. I need you to read this question, try and understand this question. There's the stem, there's the question, because I've got the mark scheme here and I need you to understand where you would get this 3 points. Referring to the item above, explain what is meant by the scientific emphasis on causal explanations. I've got the answer just there, to be honest with you. I put it on the wrong slide. That's a bit smart. 3 marks here. 4. If you have a controlled environment, a lab, and you're controlling for all the extraneous variables or the confounding variables, and you've got 2 DVs, right? And then they're having an effect on, 2 IVs, and they're having an effect on the DVs. If everything else is controlled for, but your DVs are different, the only thing that must have caused that difference was the 2 IVs. That's the bit you need to understand. In terms of evaluating this debate, there's a key couple of points I would go for. Firstly, free will, not scientific. What's the consequence of this? If we cannot prove or disprove free will, we're never going to fix the debate. This debate is never going to finish. If you cannot scientifically disprove it, it's what we call unfalsifiable. Please write that down with free will. Free will is unfalsifiable. We cannot prove it wrong. So therefore, all the people that believe in free will are just going to keep giving it the big one the whole time, right? Even though we cannot disprove them, right? It's annoying when that happens, by the way. The vast majority of psychology does actually suggest a deterministic approach, which again, not really an evaluation, to be perfectly honest with you. But these next 2, are more evaluations. Determinism is more scientific than free will. Always look to compare. Always look to compare. Determinism is more scientific than free will. What is a consequence of this? Maybe determinism has a better reputation. Maybe determinism lends itself more to science than free will. The other thing as well is that if we can see A affects B, there's a lot of practical applications that can be done if we want to prevent A causing B. So, for example, if we know that low serotonin causes depression, we can then create practical applications because of that. If you're saying depression's a choice, how do you treat that? If you're saying free will causes depression, what? I mean, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But sorry, there's a fly that's going around. It's really annoying me. So there are practical applications to deterministic approaches, but the big one is the last one. The big evaluation one is the last one. Anytime you get a chance, this is an evaluation you can use, just not for this debate, by the way. You can use it for anything. Criticize Milgram's obedience theories for saying that they are environmentally deterministic. Criticize the fact that OCD is caused by a faulty coordinate nucleus by saying it's biologically deterministic, and therefore it's offensive because it suggests we don't have free will. Therefore, it's socially sensitive because people get concerned that you're destined to get ill. You're destined to be a Nazi, for example, and throw people in the concentration camps, and there's nothing you can do about it. So it is potentially quite offensive. Here is a model answer about how you would go here. Before I go into this, I wish I'm not actually going to go into this, but this is how you write a point about social sensitivity. Try avoid evaluating the debates with the debates. Nothing looks more terrible than someone going, determinism is reductionist, which doesn't even make any sense whatsoever. Common question that comes up. Now, chances are, by the way, gang, you are going to be having a crack at, I'd say, this Dancho question up the top, just down here. It's a 16 marker. Dancho is a talented and famous musician and was taught to play the piano by his father, who was a concert pianist. Maybe Dancho is biologically determined by his musical genes, for example. Okay? Right. From the age of 4, Dancho attended a specialist music school where he spent many hours each day practicing the piano. Maybe Dancho was a concert pianist because he was environmentally determined, because he, I don't know, would get applauded by his teachers for his good work. He got rewarded and he thought, I'm going to do it again because we learn from our environment. By the way, Dancho is also from the age of 4 in the Oedipus complex. So maybe Dancho is playing the piano because hold on a second, he wants to become like his dad so he can get someone like mum, or actually get with mum, maybe this was back in the olden days, or a Game of Thrones type situation. In a recent TV interview, Dancho said, my earliest memories of notes on melody, so music is a part of me. This bit's important. To hear the applause in the concert hall is what I live for. Hard determinism alert. Even if I wanted to stop playing, I could not, because I have no free will. All right. So you would need to describe determinism, or 2 types of determinism. So for 6 marks here, you're looking at 8. There we go. I've got that finger up. 8 separate points about determinism. You then apply it, and then 2 evaluations, I would say. That is the first of the debates. I hope that was useful. I did go through some questions there that I think you're probably going to get at some point, so make sure you're having a look at them. But enjoy the rest of the debates. Peace out.